down with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. He was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God, except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." Thus ends the reading of the word. Thanks be to God.
Pastor.
Should I read the story again? Did you hear it? The context of the story is still Jesus on his way to Jerusalem. This is in chapter 17. It was in chapter 9, verse 51 of Luke's Gospel that Jesus set his face for Jerusalem, saying that he knew full well what awaited him in Jerusalem, and we know that that is death, crucifixion and death and resurrection. But he knows full well what awaits him in Jerusalem. His face is set for Jerusalem. We have 8 chapters. We are now in the 8th chapter of stories told in the context of Jesus moving toward his death. And here is this story about this pack of lepers. I don't think the lepers traveled in packs per se, but they did live in colonies and they did live in communities. And we've seen lots of stories of lepers, but they usually were, one at a time. So here Jesus encounters this pack of 10 lepers. The synoptic gospels, which are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are 3 gospels that have similar stories in them. In other words, all 3, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, had the same source material for writing most of their stories. That's why when you read Matthew and you read Mark and you read Luke, you go, well, didn't I just read that story? Well, yes. There are versions of many of the stories in all 3 of the Gospels. Those 3 synoptic Gospels. John is apart. The 3 synoptic Gospels. But Luke has some material that is distinct, that isn't in the other 2 Gospels. You don't find these stories in Matthew and you don't find them in Mark. The story of the Good Samaritan, you won't find in Matthew or Mark. This story of the 10 lepers, you won't find in Matthew or Mark. It is unique to Luke. That story of the rich man and Lazarus, you won't find in Matthew and Mark. It is unique to Luke's Gospel, which tells us that Luke had some material, some source material that was not shared by Matthew or Mark. It's a unique story. Luke has a unique Jesus. He has a unique picture of Jesus that he shares with us. The story today is a story that involves a community of people, a pack of 10, but a community of people. People who form a community relationship by virtue of the fact that they share something in common. What do these 10 share? Leprosy. They could be bankers. They could be farmers. They could be wine merchants. They could be tax collectors. They could be all sorts of different people with all sorts of different gifts, but they are all lepers. And by the virtue of the fact that they have leprosy, they now have been separated from their former lives. They have been obliged by the rules of leprosy to leave their villages, leave their homes, leave their families, leave their jobs, leave absolutely everything behind, and go live elsewhere. They They kept their distance from him. They didn't approach him. They didn't come close to him because they did not want to make him unclean. Exactly. This story is this funny, weird story about these lepers who were all mixed up. They were a mixed group of people, a mixed bag. I mean, they may have not just been bankers and farmers, but my heavens, there are Gentiles and Jews. There are Samaritans and Jewish people in this same pack of 10 lepers. Unheard of. Oh, you know that, don't you? You know that, don't you? That all Jews hated Samaritans because Samaritans didn't do stuff right. They had the same heritage, but they didn't believe the right things. But here, by virtue of this infirmity, we have a Samaritan mixed in with a bunch of Hebrew people and maybe a couple of Gentiles thrown into the collection. What happens in this story? Jesus says, "Go show yourselves to the priest." Now, it's going to be fine. If the other 9 are Hebrews, if they're Gentiles, if there are any Gentiles in the mix, the same thing is going to be true that is true for the Samaritan. There's no point in going to the priest. Because you can only go to the priest if you are Jewish. And you go to the priest because in those days, the people who determined whether or not you had leprosy were not physicians, they were the priests. And the priests decided if the disease you had was the disease that needed to quarantine you. So, you were required to go then to the priest and show the priest that you didn't have any more signs of the disease. Then you would be released from your quarantine ostracismness and go back to the life you had before. But the only person who can't go to the priest is who? The Samaritan can't go to the priest. What good is it going to do him? The priest is going to say, "What are you doing here? Out!" The Samaritan is the one who turns back to Jesus, perhaps knowing that approval from the priest is not something that's going to be warranted for him. He turns back to Jesus and he says, "Thank you. Thank you. Praise God. Thank you. Thank you for the change that has taken place in my life. Thank you for giving me new life. Thank you for giving me my life today. Thank you that I have just lost my community of friends. Thank you that I have just lost what I had become used to in the leper colony. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to try and recover a life after I started my life all over again as a leper. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." When Jesus says to him, "Your faith has made you well," that word "well" is so much larger than we can possibly imagine. That word "well" is more like whole. That word "well" is giving you assurance that all will be well in this new walk of your life. In spite of the fact that everything has been changed, in spite of the fact perhaps that the rug has been pulled out from underneath you because We are going to uplift one another and help to support one another in the trials and tribulations of this life and try to make life on this planet better every day. Not just for us, but for all of the inhabitants of the earth. There are some other communities. We have some communities here in Palm Springs. We have a homeless community here in Palm Springs where people who are homeless live. They are forced by their homelessness to become a community. And it's a very hospitable community. If you're homeless and you find where they're living, they will welcome you. And they are treated very much like the lepers of former day Jesus, that they are ostracized and marginalized by the community. And we don't know what to do with them. Just like they didn't know what to do with the lepers in the time of Jesus' day, we don't know what to do with the homeless population. We don't know how to help them change their lives, or even if they want to change their lives. And do they really want to be like us? Do they really want to have a life like ours? I want to tell you a story about a woman that I met a couple of weeks ago. Her name is Lorenza. Lorenza is an ordained minister, a fully ordained elder in the United Methodist Church, who asked her bishop permission for a different kind of appointment. The appointment that she asked for was to be a pastor, or to be homeless, essentially. She wanted to be appointed to be homeless. Her bishop said, "Are you out of your mind?" It took her bishop a year, a full year, to make a decision as to whether or not Lorenza would be allowed to be a homeless person living amongst the homeless, a fully ordained minister in the United Methodist Church. She has been homeless, living on the streets, for a year and a half. Plans to do it for 3 years. And the stories that she told when she came to the convocation, minister's convocation, which was held at Indian Wells, Esmeralda. Guess where she slept? On the street. She requested, she said, "Do you know where there's a hide?" New term to me. A hide, where I can go and be with the homeless community here in Indian Wells. And I said, "I know where the homeless are in Palm Springs. I know some of the sites where you can be welcomed into the homeless community in Palm Springs, but I can't direct you to one here in Indian Wells." And I know you got to be close because it's a heck of a commute from Palm Springs to Indian Wells. She was a keynote speaker, and was in the same clothes each day that she came and she spoke to us and talked to us. She told us incredible stories about how she had ministered to people in this setting. One of them was when she was in jail. She was thrown in the slammer because she was working for immigration reform. She was on the border, and they threw her in the slammer with a bunch of other problem people. And she happened to have her clerical collar on at the time. She doesn't wear it in the streets. But on this occasion, she had her clerical collar on because she was. And I hope you're not too sensitive. She had to go to the bathroom. Now, in the jail, they're all open stalls, and there are certain rules in the jail. You can't talk to each other at all. You have to be silent, and there's really no collaboration in this quote-unquote jail community. So she had to go to the bathroom. They get her dressed in that orange jumpsuit thingy, and apparently they put her picture up on a screen saying this person has been arrested, and it was on, I guess, television, and the people in the jail saw it. Well, her bladder is about to burst, and she's got to go to the bathroom, and she goes to the open stall and prays with them, and then can't go. So she goes out into the general population, and then eventually, so Kathy can go now. She goes back into the bathroom, and goes through the same ritual again, ready to go, and somebody else comes to her and asks for prayer. This happens 3 times until she finally discovers that the only place in this community where people can talk is in the bathroom. I tell you this story because I think we have a tendency to be immune to the kinds of communities that exist in our world and to the kinds of needs that people have in our world, and to what our part might be in being a community that reaches out and touches and understands life apart from our own. This story about the 10 lepers is a story about 10 people's lives who were changed in a moment in time, and whose community was vanished. Whose community was vanished. They did not have the same thing that held them together, the same infirmity that held them together. They had to go and find new community. What's the message for us? Oh, I think it's that there are many people out there who have lost their community, who have lost their wholeness, who have lost their wellness, and who are very much in search of a new community. I guess what I'm saying is, let us try to be that community. Let us try to be that community of people who can invite and can embrace and can enfold people who are lost.